Welcome to DoubleVision Podcast. We're identical twin sisters who grew up with retinitis pigmentosa, a degenerative eye condition. I'm Jenelle, born 4 minutes earlier, so naturally I get to go first. And I also work as a therapist, so I'm drawn to stories of healing and resilience.
And I'm Joy. I work in the field of education, and I'm also a writer. I like to bring a creative lens to how we talk about blindness.
Though we look alike, we've often seen this disease and life through very different lenses.
That's why we created DoubleVision Blog, to share our stories, our struggles, and our laughter,
which is now morphing into a podcast
to remind us that there's no single right way to navigate blindness.
On this podcast, we focus on the social and emotional impacts of losing vision,
the parts of the journey that don't show up on the eye charts. Welcome, everyone. It's just the two of us this week, and we're excited to dive into a topic that is a little bit complex. We're going to talk about grief, and we want to make sure to mention that we are not at all equating blindness with sadness, and that not all people with blindness experience grief, but all humans do experience grief. And especially when you're dealing with a degenerative condition, such as a degenerative vision loss condition, there is grief involved.
Yeah. With any type of change comes loss, and with loss comes grief. So it is part of the human experience. And yet here we are having a somewhat unique human experience of having progressive vision loss and looking at what experiences that leads to when it relates to grief. So Joy and I have written about this topic for many years on our blog. If you Google DoubleVision blog and grief, there'll be quite a number of posts where we've shared. And I would say that our experiences about grief have shifted over the years, which is normal. Like our experiences of grief do shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember 14 years ago when we started blogging and I started seeing a counselor, and she brought up the idea of grief and adjustment to vision loss counseling through the lens of grief. And I was kind of like, that's interesting. Why is she bringing up grief? No one has died. I thought this was a word that people use when they're talking about some loss of a person. And I hadn't thought of it in relation to my vision loss and it being anything that I was going through the stages of grief in. I'm curious, is that similar, Jenelle, with your clients when you bring up grief? Are people surprised?
Definitely. Grief is something I bring into most of my therapeutic sessions or some part of the therapeutic treatment plan because it's often something that isn't addressed unless someone has lost someone due to death. Otherwise, as a culture, we don't often acknowledge that grief is a part of any type of loss, whether it's a move to a new town or getting a new job or even starting a family. There can be really exciting, happy parts of life that also involve a grief process.
Yeah. And I like how you say the word process. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what the grief process is? I think people are familiar to a degree with, is it the 6 or 7 stages of grief people talk about and anger and all the different things?
There's so many different grief models. I mean, most people are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's original 5 stages of grief. And there's been, unfortunately, a lot of misconceptions about grief that even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her later years wrote she never intended to be those types of misconceptions. And a lot of her writings and research were taken out of context. One of my favorite writers on grief who I've actually had the opportunity to take some intensive training courses with is David Kessler. And he worked directly with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And he talks about the 6th stage of grief that he added. He wrote a whole book about it called Finding Meaning, the 6th stage of grief. And so I'll just briefly walk through the stages that people are kind of familiar with, which are bargaining and anger and sadness and denial and acceptance, and then that finding meaning piece. But some of the common misconceptions are that it's this linear process that, oh, first you're in denial, then you move through bargaining. And as we've found, and as most people who have had a grieving process in their life have learned, that's not true. We don't move through it in this real linear way. It has lots of twists and turns, and we can experience different stages even at the same time, and then we can move through one stage and loop back around, kind of like a switchback on a hike, and be in a stage that we were in before. So it's this really fluid process.
That's a good point. And so if you find yourself in what you think is possibly one of the stages or phases, is it something that you're like trying to move into another phase if you don't like the one you're in? Like if you're in the anger phase and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even do this anymore. Is there something that you recommend to your clients, or is there something that you're supposed to do when you're in these phases, or do you just kind of let them happen?
That's a great question. I often tell people that grief is not a problem to be solved. We're not looking to get to this stage, or even the acceptance. I was giving a presentation in front of some graduate mental health students recently, and some of them were really focused on that acceptance piece. And while I think acceptance is an important part of life, I consider acceptance to be a practice. So it's something that we often revisit again and again. It's not really this destination that we arrive at, like, now I've accepted this, and everything falls into place. I mean, maybe that's how some people experience it. From my own experience and having the honor of witnessing grief for so many people, I've found that it's not a destination. None of it is.
It's really interesting. And I wonder if some people who really want to move on with their lives have a hard time, I would say, when they find themselves back in grief. I remember reading this article a number of years ago, and it was a movie review, and it was about a part of a movie where someone had lost their vision quite a number of years before. And they were saying, oh, I miss the color of the blue sky, and I miss these things. And they said, they were being hard on the movie, and they said, gosh, no one who had lost their vision 20 years before would ever be so sad about missing their sight. This movie is so unrealistic. And I remember reading it and thinking, but is it? Like, I feel like sometimes I'm sad about things from 20 years ago now that I'm older, and things that have happened in the past that I thought I was over. And I know there's that term STUG, right? The sudden temporary upsurge of grief, that I think our friend Melissa, who we had on recently, had introduced us to that term, although she wasn't the one who coined it. But I was just thinking about how sometimes we can think that we've really gone to the place of acceptance. And then when that comes back up as a sudden emotion or something that we're really feeling, it can be surprising.
Yeah. It can be both. Grief can be both expected and unexpected. And so I think when grief has that upsurge and it's not expected, we can often judge ourselves and meet ourselves with a lot of criticism of, I shouldn't be feeling like this. I should be over this, or I worked through this. I already went to counseling for this. And that's not really a compassionate or helpful way to meet ourselves when we're in the midst of a STUG, or when we're in the midst of any type of emotion that surprises us, or that we experience some unpleasant sensations with emotions, right? All emotions are part of life. I guess I want to just go off on a short little tangent on emotions, because I feel really strongly.
I'm just going to let you do your thing.
Well, I feel so strongly about how we don't allow ourselves to experience fully being human and having these emotions that are part of being human, and we judge ourselves and others for being angry, for being sad, for being bored, for being irritable. And all of these are parts of the human experience that, if we're able to give ourselves some room for and some spaciousness around, and just allow ourselves to experience, like they say, moving with and through an emotion, it can often help us to move through it rather than resisting it or feeling like we're stuck in it.
That's a good point. So what if there's someone though in our life who they're moving through a lot of things and we're like, oh gosh, they're kind of hard to be around. Does that come up? And what's, just from the other angle of, yes, you want to feel that, but when you're a family member of somebody who's maybe going through something like this, can it be hard to let them just be in it?
Yeah, of course. And that's when I would say we all have to be doing our own work. And so, for example, Joy, if I'm noticing that you're really in a state of sadness and it's starting to impact me, where I'm noticing in myself, like, gosh, Joy keeps being sad. I don't want Joy to feel sad. I want Joy to feel joyful. I want Joy to be happy. Then that's for me to work through my emotions around that, and not to want to change you or to want you to be over it or through it or have a quicker process. Then I can start to notice, oh, I'm really uncomfortable with Joy's sadness. I'm noticing my sadness, or I'm noticing my irritability. And that would be my work to work through that. And it's never anyone else's work to change or shift anyone else with how they're feeling.
That's true. But what if you're the one you're feeling sad a lot and you're like, I'm just done being with myself in sadness right now.
Yeah.
I just don't want to do this anymore as far as sit with this same emotion. What then? What do you tell your clients, or what do you, as a human being, think about that?
That's a really great question too. And I don't think there's any one answer. I mean, there's some lovely tools that I really invite people to use, sighted or blind. Some of these tools can be used for lots of different grief experiences. I think the first one that I typically have people start with is called Inventory of Losses. And it's really just taking the time to write down, and this can be, again, in a very linear fashion or nonlinear. It can be all over the paper, but really you're writing down. So we'll take the loss of vision, for example. So the primary loss in this inventory of losses exercise would be the vision. That was what was lost. And then there's all these secondary losses that can be really important to acknowledge associated with the primary loss. So for me, for example, with vision loss, some of those secondary losses have been losses related to identity and how I show up in a room. I've always considered myself pretty outgoing and bubbly. And now when I walk in a room, I'm often really focused on my orientation, mobility, and where the chair is, and where the chair I want to sit in, or the furniture is placed, and who's in the room, and aspects that used to come to me through visual information now need to come to me through different cues. And so I experience a loss around that and some grief around that. And when I'm able to name that, then I'm able to address that. But there's so many parts of loss that we don't name. And so then it's just kind of floating around in a way that we're not able to actually acknowledge it and be with it. And I think that's why we get stuck in it or have difficulty moving through it.
That's a really good point. So you're saying that if you don't acknowledge it and you don't allow yourself to be in it, then you can end up really feeling even more stuck, or maybe it coming out in other ways, or coming out sideways and showing up, or maybe resulting in some kind of uproar, or some kind of somebody, just all of a sudden really projecting
or displacing anger. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think most of us have experienced a time where we come home from work and we're really hungry, and when somebody asks what's for dinner, you're like, I don't know. Go ask the dinner fairy, or figure it out. And so that would be an example of not acknowledging what we're feeling, which is, hunger or hanger, and addressing that, and instead projecting it. And that's pretty common. We all do that at times. I have a memory that I'd love to share about a way that I was really with my grief process over the last couple years, where I've lost the most amount of my vision. And that is from Christmas time, which is a time I really enjoy. My family celebrates the holiday of Christmas. We live in this little Bavarian themed village that really celebrates Christmas with all the beautiful lights and decorations. And my family and I have this tradition of exchanging an ornament every year. And my husband and I have been doing this for many, many years, all through our dating and marriage. And we pick an ornament each year from somewhere we visited or to represent the year. And each year when we decorate the tree, we're taking out the ornaments, and it's a really joyful time. I mean, it's not perfect. Like, I don't want to paint the picture of a Hallmark movie, right? Like, sometimes someone's like, someone ate all the eggnog or drank all the eggnog, and I don't want to put up this. I don't want to help with that. So it's, not trying to paint it as a Hallmark movie. And
Even though you live in a Hallmark town.
Yeah, I do live in a Hallmark town. Many Hallmark movies have been filmed in my town. And at the same time, I I really look forward to this every year. And so it was almost 2 years ago when we're unpacking the ornaments. And it was the first year, because it had been a whole year since they had been wrapped up from the previous Christmas time. And as people started holding up ornaments, I couldn't see the detail of the ornament anymore to see what they were talking about. I had to either get really close, or I had to touch and get the tactile information in my hand of the ornament. And I was just overcome very unexpectedly in that moment with grief, with just this real sense of like sadness and anger and just all these different emotions at once. And I was so tempted to first just be irritable with my family, because that's kind of my go-to. And then also to just go to my room and shut everyone out and just be alone in my experience. Mm. And again, sometimes we need that, and there's no judgment around that. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I just was able to gratefully, I was able to have this awareness in that moment of just needing to be with my grief and also needing to have my grief witnessed. And so I just said to my family, I'm feeling really sad right now because I can't recognize the ornaments like I used to be able to. And I had tears streaming down my face. And my kids each were sitting by me on the couch. And it was just so sweet, because kids are often so responsive in the moment in ways that we as adults have maybe been programmed not to be. And they each held one of my hands, and I think my husband was busy putting up the leg lamp, but we sat with that grief, and I was able to share it with them in a way that no one was trying to fix it or trying to say the opposite of empathy, like, well, at least we still have ornaments, or at least, all those things that
at least you can see the lights on the tree or something
that don't really allow for true empathy. And I felt their empathy just from them squeezing my hands, and then for them allowing me to feel sad about this and give me a hug. And then also the whole night didn't shut down. Like, we kept decorating the tree. We had some more eggnog. Tori finished the leg lamp. Like, we continued on. Yeah. And it was just this piece of my grief experience that is really actually a meaningful memory for me even now. And no, it's not the happy, just goofy, silly memories of past Christmases, but it's still a memory that is important to me as part of my grief journey.
Thanks for sharing that, Jenelle. It's really beautiful. And also, what a gift to your kids to allow them into that moment with you, and to really set that example of, hey, this is how you move through sad things, and what they would have missed out on if you had just gone to your bedroom and had that moment privately. I love that. I love that you shared that with them. And I love that you're sharing it with our listeners too.
Thanks, Joy. Well, I'm remembering in a post that you wrote about when your oldest daughter went away to college. I remember you writing in there that you at times felt like you had not shared your grief journey with your kids, and that you never meant to do that, but that's just kind of how it had happened. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think I did tend to clam up when it came to emotions, or it would come out sideways more as irritability then, and kind of in the anger phases, and that I didn't want them to, first of all, equate blindness with sadness, or the pity that, we've talked about that. Of course, we don't want blindness to evoke. And I think also I never would wanted to put anything on my kids that I thought, okay, this is an adult problem or an adult thing. I want my kids to just be kids and not have to, lead me around. You hear people talk about like, certain people using their kids for mobility or,
parentified children.
yes, things like that. So I think I was always just hyper aware of that. And then I just really, just wanted them to have like these, like we all do, like idyllic childhoods that are, carefree. And so I don't think it was anything intentional. This probably wasn't conscious. I wasn't thinking I am going to hide my grief from my children, but I think I did. And I think, you've helped model that for me and hearing your stories. I think that's why it's really good that we share these with one another and with everyone, and all share kind of different aspects of how we handle things, because it can really shed light upon our own experiences and kind of some things that could be helpful. And so, I didn't intentionally invite my daughter into a moment of grief before she left for college, but as some things in life just unfold the way they do, this one was like that. And I wrote about it in a post called Grief Gone Wild on our blog. And I posted it about a year ago. And essentially, I had a very shaming experience where I had tripped over my 4-year-old niece. And fortunately did not, I didn't hurt her, but she was on the stairs. I was so excited to go play with her, and I went running down to go play with her, not realizing she was sitting on the stairs, and tripped over her, really scared her, immediately went into shame.
Yeah.
And I don't even think I told that part of the story in my blog post. I just kind of alluded to it. And all of the thoughts, all of the fears, all of the things that go into your mind of like, okay, do people trust me with their kids? All of the things of being in the classroom, even when I was a classroom teacher, of gosh, am I going to get fired for safety concerns because they don't trust me? Just so many things that were compiled up over the years that I had tried to push away kind of just came brimming to the surface. And when everybody was out of the house, I was in my room just completely just sobbing. I felt very distraught. It was all coming out. I was thinking, I'm never going to be able to babysit with my nieces. And I will say I have babysat them since. And I thought I was alone in the house when I was in my moment of deep despair and grief.
Yeah, you were just letting it all out.
Letting it all out.
You're alone in your grief, right? I think most people can relate to, we will just allow that to sound however it sounds and come out however it comes out. And it can be different than how we would grieve at like a funeral where we're dabbing our eyes.
Yes. There was no composure and romanticism in this moment. This was like snot running down your face, ugly crying. Like it was not something I wanted to be witnessed. And yet I did not realize that my daughter, Lucy, who was a senior in high school at the time, had come home and all of a sudden heard me and came rushing in, I think thinking that somebody had passed away. That was the level of my grief. And she immediately, I was on the floor, and she immediately, getting a little emotional. I got this up.
Right.
She immediately,
this is a big moment.
knelt down and just wrapped her arms around me. And I said, I'm okay. I'm okay. No, everybody is safe. I am okay. I'm having a really hard moment about something that happened. And she just wrapped her arms around me, and we cried together. And I just was able to kind of let all of those unspoken, I think we talked about it in a recent episode, when sometimes something is spoken out that you have feared, it's finally like there is a relief in that, and a release of me saying, gosh, I am afraid that someday maybe whoever your spouse isn't going to trust me with my own grandkids. And I'm afraid you're not going to ask me to babysit. And she's like, Mom, are you kidding me? I'm going to be begging you to babysit. And like, it was just this moment of pure understanding of like, she obviously had seen over the years the difficulties of losing vision, and she had witnessed that. to a degree. And so to be in that moment together, it felt so cleansing. And, by the end, we
Mhm.
were kind of laughing and joking. And it really, to have that kind of vulnerability with your, nearly adult child was something I will always remember.
Oh, sounds so hard and beautiful all at the same time. And I also appreciate how you explain the transformation that occurred through that experience. So that it started with this like really guttural emotions of sadness and just despair, really. And then it through that connection and that witnessing from your daughter and the empathy that she showed you in that moment, it it transformed into this really meaningful memory for the two of you, the connection, and then even laughter and joy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
which I think laughter and joy and hope, those are all part of grief too. Sometimes that word just gets associated with the deep sadness, and yet that word also can encompass all of it. We can hold all of it.
Mm, yeah. And it's hard, right?
Yeah.
But it is cleansing. I guess that's the only word I can think of. I'm wondering, is this something that you have noticed with the clients adjusting to vision loss that you work with? And how do you encourage those kind of moments without, I guess, kind of, we never want to like contrive something or try to like
Mhm.
make these happen. And yet not everyone always has supportive family, or
Right.
like how do you support your clients through some of these really hard emotions, and especially if we have listeners right now that are like, gosh, I don't know where to start with this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's, again, I always like to preface that it's going to look different for everyone. And at the same time, the one thing I really know is that grief needs to be witnessed. Doesn't mean it needs to be witnessed all the time. It does need to be witnessed, though. And so finding people, whether it be close family or friends, or maybe it's a support group, or maybe it's like when we had Melissa from the Daring Sisters, maybe it's a group like that. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's someone at church. Find the people who you trust or you feel like you could trust in a moment to be there and witness maybe just a piece of your journey. It doesn't have to be like, and now let me share every aspect of my grief journey with you, right? It could be even that inventory of losses exercise I mentioned earlier. Sometimes I'll just encourage someone to just start with one aspect of their life. Maybe it was a move at age 8 that was never really acknowledged as how hard it was and how so
Mm,
all of those secondary losses that went along with it. And I'll encourage people, we don't have to do the entire timeline all at once. We can take it in little pieces and sort of dip our toes in the water and notice the people that meet us with those that empathy and that compassion. And and I guess I will ask you, Joy, like, what are some examples of ways people have met you, in addition to Lucia, over the years with empathy or compassion in ways that helped you feel open enough to share and have your grief be witnessed?
that's a good question. I think it's, some of it has been with people who have experienced vision loss, as we've mentioned in earlier episodes about, the Daring Sisters and good friends. But oftentimes it's also been people who have said things like, gosh, I don't know what it's like to lose vision, but I relate with loss, and I know I'm human, and I relate in this way, and kind of that shared human connection and capacity to support one another in our shared experiences of sadness and grief and emotion. And because then it made me feel really, normalized or validated in those moments of, oh, I'm not alone, even if it's
Mm,
not the specificity of grief. Everyone has experienced loss, and you can't be alive on this planet without having experienced that. And a number of people have experienced, ambiguous loss, which
Hmm.
vision loss really is that ambiguous loss because it's the loss that keeps on giving. It just is one that, it's continual. So just when you feel
Mhm.
like, oh, I've adjusted to this, then it's in a way like aging. And so
Yeah.
people can relate like that. So yeah, I think that's been a big part of it.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about just being able to name what is happening, being able to have what's ambiguous, bringing that to the forefront and having people, even if they cannot relate directly to that experience of what it's like to go blind, they can relate to what it feels like to age and to have things change. I mean, a lot of it is just the change that comes with all of life. Even just today, I noticed it's a one of those funny fall days where it was pouring rain in the morning and then it
Mm.
was sunny a little bit late morning, and then at one point the sun and the rain were together at the same time, and who knows what will happen next. But I've learned in my life, or I'm learning, I'm still growing and trying to be present for all of it, the rain and the sunshine, just the mixture of unpredictability that is grief and that is being a human.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of a lot of change, a lot of transition, and I think some of the most painful experiences come when we try to resist those and we try to be out of that experience because there's so much that we experience both in our bodies, our minds, our spirits when we are resisting something that is. And yeah, I know that you and I have talked a lot about that. I am curious. I just wanted to circle back briefly to the misconceptions. I know you mentioned some misconceptions about grief. I think that would be a great way to kind of wrap our conversation up.
Mm.
I know you mentioned that grief is linear. What are
Grief
some
is
other
not
that grief
linear.
is not
Yeah.
linear? I know as a
Oh,
misconception. Yeah.
yes.
What are some other misconceptions or myths about grief?
Yeah, that it happens in a certain order, that it's meant to be done alone, that it's a problem to be solved, that it's something to be feared, something to be denied. Uh, maybe even that it shouldn't be happening, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
there's this resistance, like I shouldn't feel this way. And I appreciate that you brought up shame in your story. I think shame is just such a huge piece of it that we've really unpacked in our blog over the last 14 years. And thanks to the language of authors and researchers like Brene Brown, we've really been able to gain a lot of knowledge and understanding and bring life to that rather than it just because I know before shame was just sort of this pit feeling that we couldn't name in our stomachs, that we couldn't understand why every time the topic of retinitis pigmentosa or vision loss came up, we were just flooded with emotion or just shut down completely. And really to understand the kind of the root of that. So understanding how shame and grief relate is really important.
Yeah. And another one that I've heard you talk about before is family members who think they should be over this by now. It's been
Mm-hmm.
because 2 years or, whatnot, or sometimes even less than that, because I know there's early stages of grief typically
Mm-hmm.
when something happens, right? Is that typically?
Typically, I mean, they say in the grief trainings that I've gone to, and again, there's so many different theories and thoughts around this, but typically early grief is considered anything within the first 2 year. Any loss within the first 2 years is considered early stages of grief, and that often will surprise people. People will think, "Oh, I should be farther along." I'm like, "What? This happened 9 months ago? Wow!"
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's considered early grief, and so I might, if I'm meeting with someone and it's been over 2 years, I'm not going to be like, you should be over this by any means. I am going to look at, okay, if we're having this grief reaction that is looking more like what we see in early grief, like what are some of the obstacles that are maybe getting, what are some of the barriers, or what are some of the things that might the emotions that might want to be expressed that maybe don't feel there's room for? Where can we add some spaciousness to explore and just allow ourselves to really feel and experience
Mm.
what often feel like unpleasant emotions.
Yes. Well, really grateful that we gotten to have this conversation today. Is there anything that we didn't touch on there's lots that we didn't touch on as far as grief. We have covered all of the things of grief.
The end.
Goodbye, everyone. But is there anything that we haven't discussed on this episode that you had been hoping to touch on when it comes to grief?
I feel like it'll be one of those things when I listen to the recording afterwards, I'll be like, oh, I forgot to mention this or that. But in this moment, it feels complete. I feel this is where we're at in this moment. I'm grateful for your vulnerability in sharing with our audience today, and just for people listening to hopefully feel that they're not alone in any grief or loss experience that they're having in their life, that this is really part of the human experience, and that it's something we don't talk about nearly enough in our culture. I really love the idea of gathering together as a community. We had a really horrible tragedy in my community at the beginning of summer, and my friend and I gathered some people together. We invited people in to experience the grief reaction to this tragedy together. And it was really powerful to hear from all the community members who participated in that grief ceremony how many people thought they were just grieving alone at home, and how having the invitation to come together and share their experiences felt really empowering and just allowed us to connect rather than feeling separate and alone in our grief experiences. We were able to see, wow, like this major unexpected tragedy, this trauma is something that is really something that needs our attention. And I guess along those lines, I will add that as a trauma therapist, there's always grief and trauma. There's not always trauma and grief. That's not always a part of grief, but there's always grief and trauma. And so just recognizing that, and because sometimes we feel like, oh, there's this thing, this ambiguous loss, this thing I can't name. Again, I shouldn't feel this way, or why do I still feel this way? And it's like, yeah, you can feel that way. You can have your grief response, your grief experience to what is really difficult.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of goes back to the grief needing to be witnessed, like you shared when at the beginning, and then mentioning this community grief session that you led. And I think, for all of our listeners too, to know that if you are experiencing something that is kind of an ongoing, more ambiguous loss, such as loss from a disease that's going to continue to degenerate, such as retinitis pigmentosa, that you can, it doesn't mean that you're not moving forward in life positively, or not being independent. If you have these moments, or if you're going through a process, you can still be this strong, interdependent person dealing with blindness and using all of the tools and moving through life and doing pretty well, and still experiencing this at the same time. So
it's not an either or. Yeah,
it's really not. It's both.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we want to transition at the close of our podcast. We're trying something out here. So just stick with us here, because this could be a complete disaster. This is us being really vulnerable, but we were thinking that it would be fun to just do something silly and lighthearted, play a little game. Joy and I love playing games. We grew up playing really fun games we have this huge extended family, and everyone loves to play games. And so we thought, what if we play a game at the end of each of our episodes? And at times when we have guests, we can invite them to play the game. And we thought it could be something like twin telepathy, because we're twins.
People often ask us, can we read each other's minds? I know a lot of twins growing up, especially identical, I think, have like their own language. We never had anything weird like that. But if you did, that's okay. You were allowed to have that. But we have been asked if we have ESP. So we thought it would be fun to play twin telepathy. So this is going to be at the end of every episode. So Jenelle is going to say a word, and this is kind of after a game that we like to play called Blank Slate. Super fun game. feel like they should be a sponsor because we're just giving them a plug right now for their game, but it's really good.
That's a great attempt at sponsors, Joy.
Yes. Be the perfect sponsor. Blank slate. But it's this game where you have these little whiteboards on a marker and you get this card that says, let's say, ice cream, or you would say snow flake. So there's always a blank and you're trying to figure out how to fill in the blank. So we thought if we had some words, Joy and I could say 1, 2, 3 and say the word at the same time to see if we really have twin telepathy. So this could work out really well. And I don't know how to prove to our listeners that we didn't contrive this, only to say that I promise, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, that we did not plan this and that we're just doing this spur of the moment. Yes. But I think it's making us sound guilty, like we did talk about it, the fact that we're going out of our way to say how much we didn't, but we didn't.
Yeah, I do sound pretty guilty. Okay, so we decided to pick words today that have to do with the season. So right now it's fall. So I'm going to say pumpkin. 1, 2, 3, pie.
Latte.
Okay, so I said pie, you said latte. We did not have twin telepathy. I'm curious if anyone of our listeners matched with us. We'll try 2 more fall words, autumn words.
So how about the word autumn? 1, 2, 3. Harvest.
I didn't say it. Sorry. I was like, I was going to say festival, but it just couldn't come out. It just made it a sound. That was awkward. Okay. Then we'll do 1 more word. Let's see. How about the word Halloween? 1, 2, 3. Candy. Party, candy. They're related at least.
Guess we don't have telepathy.
No, we don't.
Maybe next time.
We'll try again.
Have a great week, everyone. Thank you for listening to DoubleVision Podcast. If you found this valuable, we'd love for you to leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice or subscribe on YouTube. We'd also love for you to keep in touch with us on social media, Facebook, Instagram. And if you have an idea for an episode or something that you'd like to process, please feel free to leave us a voice message at 949-414-8336 or send us an email at mail@doublevisionblog.com. All of this is also listed in the show notes.